Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take sources you're interested in and, well, pull out the key knowledge, the stuff you need to know, but without all that information overload feeling.
Yeah, kind of a shortcut to getting up to speed.
Exactly. So today, we're diving into some really fascinating new findings about our own galaxy, the Milky Way.
And it's all thanks to this incredible mission from the European Space Agency called Gaia.
Right, Gaia. So the sources we have are basically excerpts discussing the astrophysics of our galaxy.
That's it, specifically focusing on some, early results coming out of Gaia's Data Release 3.
Data Release 3, okay.
And it's worth mentioning, this is a pretty big deal. It basically makes earlier surveys, like the Geneva Copenhagen spectroscopic survey, somewhat obsolete in terms of scale.
Right, a major leap forward then. So the mission for this deep dive,
Hmm.
what are we trying to achieve?
We want to explore how this Gaia data is, well, really revolutionizing how we understand the stars in the Milky Way.
You mean like their structure, how they formed, how they evolve over time?
Precisely.
Yeah.
And we'll look at two main data samples that are giving us these insights.
Okay, what are they?
So one uses data just from Gaia's radial velocity spectrometer, the RVS.
RVS, got it.
And the other one, they're actually calling it the golden sample.
Ooh, golden sample. Sounds important.
Well, yeah, because it pulls together all the relevant Gaia data. So you've got spectroscopy.
Well, which is like breaking down the light,
Exactly. Tells you what stars are made of. Then astrometry.
measuring their positions and movement super precisely.
And photometry, measuring their brightness in different colors. So really the whole package.
Okay. So before we get into those samples, maybe give us a sense of the scale here. You mentioned the Geneva Copenhagen survey.
Right. So maybe 20 years back, that was state of the art. It looked at around, say, 14,000 nearby stars, F and G types mostly.
14,000. Okay, seems like a lot.
It was. But Gaia, we're talking hundreds of millions of stars now.
Whoa. Hundreds of millions.
Yeah. I mean, the authors of our source material point out that even the Geneva Copenhagen team predicted their work wouldn't really be surpassed until something like Gaia came along.
And now it has.
And now it definitely has.
That difference in scale, 14,000 versus hundreds of millions, it must just open up completely new questions you can ask.
Oh, absolutely. It's a paradigm shift, really.
Okay, so let's dig into that first sample then. The one using just the RVS data. You said Recio-Blanco and colleagues analyzed this?
That's right. Using data from what's called the GSP spec module.
And what did they find first off?
Well, one of the initial things was looking at the distribution of effective temperatures, TEF. Basically how hot the stars are across the galaxy.
Okay, and what did that show?
They used about 5.6 million stars for this. And it really highlights the different populations. So in the main disk of the galaxy and the central bulge, you mostly see giant stars dominating the view.
Okay.
But the data also clearly shows the effect of interstellar dust.
Yeah.
The stuff between the stars.
Right, blocks the light.
Exactly. It makes the more distant cool giants look fainter, harder to see. But then, if you look above or below the main plane of the galaxy, you start seeing more of the nearby dwarf stars, which are intrinsically fainter and tend to have, well, a different average temperature.
So the dust kind of filters your view depending on where you look.
Pretty much. Like looking through a foggy window, what you see clearly depends on how thick the fog is and how far away things are.
Makes sense. The source also mentions something called a Keel diagram. What is that and why is it useful here?
The Keel diagram. Think of it like a fundamental tool for astronomers studying stars. It plots surface gravity against that effective temperature, TEF.
Okay.
And for this study, they plotted over 200,000 stars, and they color-coded it based on how many stars fall into each little box on the diagram, the density.
So what jumps out when you look at that?
What's really striking is how clearly you can see the different evolutionary stages of stars. They form these distinct sequences and clumps on the diagram.
Like you can see where the young stars are than the old ones?
Sort of, yeah. For instance, there's a feature called the red clump. These are evolved stars, helium-burning stars. And the diagram shows that where these red clump stars sit depends quite strongly on their metallicity.
Metallicity. That's the term for elements heavier than hydrogen and helium, right?
Exactly. It's basically a proxy for the star's initial ingredients, which tells us about its age and the history of the gas it formed from.
And that dependence is different for the red clump compared to other evolved stars.
Yeah, the source highlights that distinction. And you can also see another group, young, massive, metal-rich stars clustered in a specific region.
And where are those located in the galaxy?
Well, the analysis suggests these are primarily found in the Milky Way's spiral arms.
Wow. So the diagram connects a star's physical properties directly to its life stage and its location.
Precisely. It's a really powerful visual tool. It's like reading the star's biography just from its position on this chart.
Incredible. Okay, and the third insight from the RVS data was about this metallicity itself mapped across the galaxy.
Yes. They looked at the median stellar metallicity in different parts of the galaxy.
And why is that important? What does that map tell us?
It reveals the chemical history, in a way. The thin disk, which is where our sun lives and where a lot of younger stars are, that shows a generally higher metallicity, more enriched material.
Okay.
But then you look towards the central bulge, or at the thicker disk component. The mix there is, on average, more metal poor, suggests older populations formed earlier on.
Right, from less processed gas.
Exactly. But what's also interesting is that even when you look far away from the galactic plane, way up or down, you find a mix. You find some high metallicity stars that probably belong to the thin disk but have maybe been kicked out somehow. And you also find genuinely metal-poor halo stars, which are thought to be very old or perhaps remnants of consumed smaller galaxies.
So it paints a picture of a really dynamic, mixed-up galaxy, not just neat layers.
Definitely. It hints at a complex formation history, lots of mixing, maybe past mergers.
Okay, that RVS-only data is already giving us a ton. Now let's switch to this golden sample. Using all the Gaia data, spectroscopy, astrometry, photometry.
Right. This is aiming for, well, the highest quality, most comprehensive picture for specific types of stars. It's divided into subsets.
And the first subset mentioned is OBA stars.
Yes. O, B, and A-type stars. These are the really hot, massive, bright ones.
And what's the big news about them from Gaia?
The sheer numbers. Again, before Gaia, we maybe had catalogs with, I don't know, around 30,000 or so OBA stars.
Okay.
Gaia's golden sample includes over 3 million of them.
3 million? That's just staggering.
It really is. It's like going from a blurry photo to a super high-resolution map.
So why are these OBA stars particularly useful? What do they tell us?
Well, because they're so massive, they burn through their fuel really quickly. They have short lives, astronomically speaking.
Okay, so they don't live long enough to move far.
Exactly. They don't have much time to wander away from the star-forming regions or the spiral arms where they were born.
Ah, so they act like tracers for those structures.
Precisely. Mapping out these 3 million OBA stars lets us trace the galaxy's spiral structure and star-forming regions with unprecedented detail. It's a game changer for understanding the galaxy's, current architecture.
And how do they use the Gaia data for that? Is it just position?
Position is key, but also their velocities. Gaia measures transverse velocities, how fast they move across our line of sight, very accurately.
Right.
And the researchers use these velocities to help classify the stars into different populations. Thin disk, thick disk, halo based on sort of velocity thresholds, like how dynamically hot or cold they are.
Okay, so speed helps sort them into different galactic components. What about the more, let's say, normal stars? The source mentions FGKM stars.
Yes. FGKM types. These are the vast majority of stars in the galaxy, including stars like our sun, a G-type.
The galactic rank and file?
You could say that. And because they live much, much longer than the OBA stars.
They carry a longer history.
Exactly. They hold the fossil record, if you like, of the galaxy's formation and chemical evolution over billions of years.
And the golden sample has a lot of these too.
Oh, yes. A huge sample, about 6.3 million, selected using various quality cuts on their temperature, gravity, metallicity, and other parameters derived from the Gaia data.
And what's the main use case shown for them?
One key visualization mentioned is simply projecting their positions onto the galactic plane.
Just showing where they are.
Yeah, it gives you this fundamental map of the galaxy's main stellar body. Where does the bulk of the stellar mass actually live? It seems basic, but having such a huge, well-characterized sample makes that basic map incredibly detailed and informative.
Right, a really solid foundation. Okay, moving on to some perhaps more unusual objects, ultra-cool dwarfs, UCDs.
Yeah, UCDs. These are right at the bottom end of the stellar scale and even below it.
What do you mean below it?
Well, they include the very coolest, faintest stars that are still burning hydrogen, like late M dwarfs. But the term also covers brown dwarfs.
Ah, the failed stars. Not quite massive enough for sustained fusion.
That's them. And the tricky part is just looking at their light, their spectra or colors, it can sometimes be hard to tell a very cool star from a warmer brown dwarf. Their atmospheres can look quite similar.
So how did the golden sample team tackle that?
They got clever. They combined the temperature estimates from Gaia with estimates of the star's radii
How do you get the radius?
by using the Stefan-Boltzmann law, basically relating temperature, radius, and luminosity. They used infrared brightness measurements, often from other surveys, to help estimate the luminosity.
Okay, combining Gaia data with other info.
Exactly. In doing this, they built a really high-quality sample of over 21,000 UCDs.
And what did they find out about them?
One really interesting finding, highlighted, is about the relationship between their mass and their radius. They found a distinct minimum, or maybe a turning point, in that relationship around a temperature of 2,000 Kelvin.
A minimum in the mass-radius relation. What does that tell us?
It gives us really important clues about the physics governing these objects, how matter behaves under the extreme pressures and temperatures inside them, especially right around that boundary between being a star and being a brown dwarf. It tests our theoretical models.
Fascinating. Okay, one last category mentioned, carbon stars.
Right. Carbon stars. These are pretty cool evolved stars.
Evolved how?
They're typically in the late stages of their lives on what's called the asymptotic giant branch, or AGB.
AGB.
And the key thing is their atmospheres have become enriched with carbon. More carbon than oxygen, which gives them very distinct spectral signatures.
And where does the extra carbon come from?
Two main ways, usually. One is if the star is in a binary system, it might have had carbon-rich material transferred onto it from its companion star when that star was evolving.
Okay, mass transfer.
The other way is internal. During the AGB phase, stars fuse helium into carbon deep inside. Sometimes, through convective processes, this freshly made carbon can get dredged up to the star's surface.
Ah, bringing the nuclear ashes to the outside.
Sort of, yeah. And these stars are important because they lose a lot of mass through strong stellar winds near the end of their lives.
Sending that carbon-rich material out into space.
Exactly. They are significant contributors to the chemical enrichment of the interstellar medium. They seed the galaxy with heavy elements, including lots of carbon, which is obviously crucial for life as we know it, among other things.
So studying them tells us about stellar death and the recycling of matter.
Precisely. And about the end-of-life processes for stars that start out with relatively low mass, like our sun eventually.
So what did Gaia's golden sample reveal about where these carbon stars are?
They identified over 15,700 of them. And when you plot them in galactic coordinates, you see, unsurprisingly, a strong concentration along the galactic plane, where most stars are.
Makes sense.
But interestingly, they also show up clearly in the Magellanic Clouds.
Our nearby satellite galaxies?
And also in the Sagittarius stream.
That's the trail of stars being ripped from a dwarf galaxy the Milky Way is currently eating, right?
That's the one. So these carbon stars act as tracers not just within our main disk, but also for these external structures and past or ongoing interactions. They help us map out the larger environment and history of the Milky Way.
Wow. Okay, this has been, well, definitely a deep dive. It's really quite incredible how much detail Gaia's Data Release 3 is already providing about, all these different kinds of stars in our galaxy.
Absolutely. I mean, these are still considered early results in many ways, but they're already just transforming our understanding. Stellar properties, where stars are, how they're moving, how they evolve. The level of detail is just unprecedented.
It feels like we've gone from a sketch to a high-definition photograph.
That's a good analogy. And astronomers are going to be mining this data, finding new things for many, many years to come.
So, stepping back for a final thought, what does this incredibly detailed stellar map mean for the really big questions? Think about something like dark matter.
Right. We can't see dark matter directly.
But we see its gravity affecting the stars we can see. Could this incredibly precise map of star positions and motions help us, maybe, map the dark matter distribution more accurately?
That's definitely one of the major goals, I think. By measuring stellar orbits with such precision, especially further out in the halo, you can infer the gravitational potential, which is dominated by dark matter. Gaia's data is crucial for that.
Or what about galactic history? You mentioned seeing stars from the Sagittarius stream.
Yeah. Being able to chemically tag stars and know their precise orbits means we can potentially identify groups of stars that originated in smaller galaxies that merged with the Milky Way billions of years ago.
Like galactic archaeology.
Exactly. We can potentially reconstruct the Milky Way's merger history in much more detail. So yeah, you have to wonder, with this level of detail about the stars, what other major cosmic puzzles might become clear? It really opens up possibilities.
Make you think. And as you said, these studies we've touched on, They're just scratching the surface of what's in Data Release 3.
Oh, absolutely. There's just a vast amount of information there waiting for more exploration.